Let us now move on to the next speaker.
Której wystąpienie zatytułowane
From the University of Warsaw will speak about life and death in the architectural universe.
Dobrze, dzień dobry, witam Państwa.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So I'll talk about life and death of form in the architectural universe. Well, I hope you can see the slide, but these are the main points of my presentation. So I would like to present certain concepts, schools of thinking about architectural design. But first, let me focus on cities and alternative categories and research methods, and then I will talk about determinism and immortality, and then we have historical contextualism and modernism, which is not contextual, and certain approaches of referring to or turning one's back to history. So it's about this timeless nature of form, I think. Then I have a very brief reflection on the contextual form, which presents the current way of thinking about the school, and finally conclusions on the search for Holy Grail in architecture. So a city is the universum of architecture because of having this condensed history. But we got used to, we usually speak about history of cities, but I would like to refer to Italo Calvino's book, Invisible Cities. So in urban spaces we're confronted with both the linear historic narratives in all residential centers with successive layers of urban fabric from antiquity to the present. They are superimposed. So it's about creating many histories of cities. So the same applies to time. So now let me refer to another collection of short stories by Calvino. There is this beautiful scene in the first story when men attacked by a lion sends out arrows, deadly arrows, and Calvino suspends that story when this arrow is flying, is going towards that lion. So it's about avoiding death and whether that arrow would finally reach the target. So the short story ends before we learn about it. So we have that suspense and the potential histories that could happen. So if that arrow hit the lion, we would say that would be the story of a man. If it missed, that would be the story of a lion. So it's the timeless nature of a concept. So it would be a bit too long, take a bit too long to explain that. But I will be using two concepts. Mircea Eliade, who defines and divides the time into mythical time that existed very early at the start of our civilization, which is a circular time. And Mircea Eliade, he sets out this category of things happening outside the time. It's a time loop of repeatable rituals. So in that context, it is suspended. But then, following the agrarian revolution, and we followed that historical time. So that's the terminology. And then we have another approach, and similarity when thinking about the time. So we have the so-called presentism. So there is no past, no future, and our perception of time is related to here and now. So we come very close to that mythical time, And then we, in another approach, we consider time continuum, which is this cause and result sequence. So present affects the future. Then, when discussing these schools of thinking about the form of source, architectural forms, there is this certain feature of time and certain events, which is determinism and finalism. So when we have that continuity or historical time, that determinist approach prevails. So once again, the past events affect the present, and the present will affect the future. And finalism is about our potential or option to change. We can sever our links with determinism. We can achieve the expected time and project it onto contemporary time. So our future is projected on the present, and we move away from the determinism and the cause and effect sequence. So that finalism also partially refers to the determinism, but it's substantially stronger than in presentism. So presentism does not offer that continuum. It imagines the future concepts that we can join, that we can take and use. Now, when speaking about determinism and finalism, let me add another author, a German historian, Reinhard Koselleck. He wrote that determinism and finalism, these were immanent features of history, and that sparkled, that conflict, and gave birth to potential clashes of these two elements. So he mentions pairs and as illustrations. So he believes that for new histories to occur, there must be births and deaths. Here we have Dino Buzzati from his poem, and this poem is about Orpheus and Eurydice. So I've used this picture, this as illustration, because it fits beautifully into that concept of birth and death. Because in cities we have that continuous exchange of generations. We have burials and births, so the new generations create history anew and will tell new stories when compared to the stories of the past generation. But in the same book, we have that train going to eternity, a railway station that is for those who are saying goodbye to their lives. So architecture also gives birth and dies. So buildings are born and die. Then another pair is survival and healing. So according to Koselleck, you need annihilation to generate stories. So without annihilation, later histories cannot exist. So that would be, for example, high-rise buildings in cities that are destroyed because of some external conditions. So they are annihilated to make room to other solutions. So Paris reconstruction preceded by fire, and 1662 Great Fire of London followed by rebuilding and reconstruction. So we have these deaths, death by destruction, death by annihilation. So killing is about annihilation to make room for new story for new potential events. Then Koselleck mentions another category, that is friend and enemy, friend and foe. He calls this conflict the Greeks and barbarians, in the sense that each civilization, each city has an element of invasion in its history. So that element of continuous conflict persists, and well, I think it would be it would make point here to show a picture of Warsaw in ruins, a very dramatic point in the history of the city. On the one hand, and as Koselleck says, new history starts from there. Then he mentions the tension between internal and external space. So something is happening and changes the cause and effect relationship. So that's the debate about boundaries and mutual influences. No matter how we respect our history, there will be always some influence coming from peripheries, and they bring certain patterns, they bring certain models, and imperia also mark the space, so there are new elements coming, and these elements are not born by our history, but born in foreign civilizations. Then Koselleck mentions the conflict between the strong and the weak. So that was French Revolution, October Revolution, and then arson in Paris. So these walls that we are erecting, the social contexts are destroyed at some point. But then every time we must ask whether that is going to be a history of humans, like in the case of Calvino's short story, or another story. So we do not resolve that question. We don't know who the winner was. So we have these two schools of determinism and finalism. So the first school, and this is what we teach students, we always start our design courses on analyzing architectural context. So here we have that contextual school of thinking. We need to look at sources of forms on the basis of analyses. Then we have that anti or counter-history school, and it claims that the world of abstract, the world of idea is the source of forms. That could be the world of ideal forms like Plato, or the neosphere with all ideas circling above us in the air, or the space by Carl Jung. So we have all these abstract references. They bring us some inspirations, they bring us the concepts for construction of forms. So many modernists spoke about turning their backs on history. So it's about not looking for teachers, for professors. And here are juxtaposed two sources. So these two schools have been ironically presented. So these are satires by Peichel. The first one is a contextual school which demonstrates that history is a teacher. We see some styles, and even if we design some forms, we are the next link in the chain of history. We create history, and those who come after us, they'll be also studying and contributing to that role of architecture. Then we have the modernist schools So again, we have this question mark. Shortly, through our meditation, we connect with this abstract world outside any context, because the sources are not in the context. And now, very briefly about that form. So in that school, which is based on history and context, there are again two trends, and let me mention them. So this is why I've selected that building which is packed or covered by Cristo, wrapped by Cristo. So we do not focus on details with certain friezes and decorations. So we are not inspired by all the decorative part. There is this school which is looking for a certain system of values in history. So Jacques Le Goff offered that division of breakdown of history of civilization into three periods. So time of church and time of merchant and time of clock. And now we're in the phase of clock, and time of church is sometimes referred to as the time of God. So he was teaching that neither space nor time were owned by human. Well, human time was devoted to God, and it was through that an expression of spiritual values. Then in the merchant times, the time and space was then owned by men. So when we speak about the merchant times, we are speaking about certain values that could be used in our everyday life. And then we have the time of clock. That started off in the time of industrialization. It's about introducing standard, the clock time that started from the Industrial Revolution and continues to the present. And in that sense, the fundamental assumptions of the historical and contextualism and a historical modernism trends does not require reinvention of forms. It just claims that the spiritual values in architecture are worth continuing. Well, of course, that could be redefined at present, but it's about appreciating the spiritual values that come from history of architecture. Then we have the values that we can use, and then we have the concept of standards and innovation in architecture. However, postmodernism was mainly the example of that history was used more as a pattern, as a list or set of models for architecture. So postmodernism is gone and it has reached its end, but we may still believe that we have this obligation to continue certain approaches. So for postmodernism has left that literal meaning, which is difficult to defend. But then there was this concept of collage introduced, which was the fragmentation of history. So it was Derrida's concept-based conceptual partitioning of history to create mixes which we would appreciate. So I would refer to that as the Frankenstein-like approach to architecture. We attempted using elements which are long dead, and we try to bring them to life. And then we have this ahistoric school of modernism. As I said, it believes that the sources of form should come from outside any context, and
Schulz nazywa,
as Chris Albert
właściwie
Schulz
tutaj mamy do
calls
czynienia z
it.
porządkiem
Here
chronogeometrycznym.
we are dealing with
To znaczy, że to jest
chronogeometrical order,
czysta
pure
geometria.
geometry, as he claims.
Tutaj, prawda, którą można wstawić do dowolnego
This
kontekstu,
pure
w jakimś
geometry
sensie
can be
forma jest w ogóle
put in any
autonomiczna wobec
context.
kontekstu.
The
Ona w
form
momencie, jak się
is
materializuje w
autonomous
kontekście,
in the context,
oczywiście
and when it
tworzy relacje z
materializes
tym
in the
kontekstem,
context,
tylko to jest
it
relacja
obviously
post factum,
creates
to nie jest to,
and
co w
starts a
tej szkole
relationship with the context,
kontekstualno-historycznej,
but this
gdzie
is
najpierw
not
szukamy relacji,
what we have in
wychodzimy
the
z tego formy
contextual
po to,
and
żeby ta forma wzrosła się z tym
historian
kontekstem, to
school
odwrotnie.
when we
Ta forma powstaje
are
w innej
looking for the
przestrzeni,
relationship. Here is it's quite
materializuje się w
opposite. That
kontekście
form
i
was
oczywiście
created in
nawiązuje w
different
cudzysłowie,
space and
nawiązuje do
materializes
relacji,
in the
w tym
context.
sensie rzekomo działa
Then
podobnie,
it
ale
initiates
absolutnie ma
certain
inne
relations. So
I
it has
oczywiście
a
to, co o
very
czymś mówiłam,
different
to
source.
znaczy, który jest bardzo silny w
And
tej szkole
here, this
modernistycznej,
trend, which is
kontekstualny, to
very
jest
strong
właśnie
in that contextual and modernistic
wizja,
school,
że jest jeszcze
this is about idealizing the vision.
przyszłości,
So it's not only the vision of form, but the vision of the future. It should occur now. It should be designed now. So futurist movement is completely acontextual. All the potential visions
Natomiast ja to nazwałam już jako pewną znowu częściowo
movement.
też krytykę, jak daleko to idzie.
Now,
I taka, prawda,
I would criticize
jeżeli mamy szczęśliwego
how
Jokera, może
the approach and how deep it goes,
że ta
but
wizja przyszłości może rzeczywiście
it could
kiedyś
be
będzie
as
tak
well
wyglądać. Ale
that
my nigdy
the
nie wiemy,
vision
więc ustawianie
may
się
not
architektów
be
jako
as it
proroków
is
i
expressed.
wymuszanie
So
decyzji pod tą
sometimes
ideę,
we
znamy to oczywiście
position
dodatkowo z
architects as
komunizmu.
prophets
Jest to
and
bardzo
we
groźne.
enforce
Dodatkowo
certain
tutaj mamy
decisions,
Shigematsu,
which
ten
is
taki obraz superego i też Joker
maybe
reprezentuje taki
threatening. So I
superindywidualizm,
would refer
wiara
to
w siebie,
Joker
w swój
here.
umysł,
A
że nawet nie
figure of
musimy się z
Joker
przestrzenią abstraktu
represents
łączyć,
that
żeby
very
jakieś wyższe
individual
warstwy
approach.
tej idei zdobywać, bo, prawda,
So
wierzymy,
these
że nasz
ideas
umysł
may
jest
come from
wystarczający,
upper
więc
layers,
tych
but we
proroków
still
w
believe
przyszłości
that
jest
the
oczywiście
minds
dużo i
of
tu też
prophets,
oczywiście
when reaching to
uważam
the
to
past,
też pewną
came in
karykaturę.
abundance. So
No i teraz poszukiwanie, to już prawie kończąc,
let
to
me move on to the
życie i
next
śmierć
and
formy, to
final
znaczy,
part,
w przypadku szkoły
which is
historyczno-kontekstualnej tam jest
about
zgoda
life
podobna
and
do
death.
tego,
So
prawda,
in that
narodzenie i śmierć,
school of
że
architecture
tam jest zgoda w tej szkole
and modernism, so
historyczno-kontekstualnej
that
na przemijanie
school of
form, na przemijanie
historian
stylu
and
i dawanie
context,
miejsca nowym
there is this
pokoleniom.
accord that
To jest to
certain
rozumienie tego świętego grala. Natomiast w
aspects
przypadku
die
szkoły
and
modernistycznej,
pass. So that's the Holy
akontekstualnej,
Grail. But
to
in
właściwie
a
cały
contextual
czas posługuje
modernist
się tej formy
approach,
idealnej.
the
Ten, który
search
jest
for
na tyle
ideal
uniwersalny,
form
że
continues.
właściwie już
This
jest
ideal form is
zaznaczona jest właśnie
universal
w tej
enough.
kategorii ponad
So
czasem.
it is classified to this timeless category. And at some point this timeless category will grow old and die. So here we have that vision of that perfect geometry, which is beyond any assessment by history. And here it is amazing or surprising that Ricardo Boffi, who represents postmodernism in two interviews, had very similar intentions to Mies van der Rohe. He believed that as architects we should plunder the history of architecture and dig up that timeless concept and explore it. So that timeless concept in history of architecture, Bocchella, he considered that classicism. He wanted to find it, he wanted to revive it in 1980s. On the other hand, Mies van der Rohe, again, he represents the timeless, universal, eternal form of abstraction. And during one of his lectures, Jean Nouvel, he said that Mies van der Rohe, he reached the limits of architecture. So these forms, his ideas are the purest expression. So let me add here that this debate continues when it comes to universal time, mythical time, and historic time. So that continues when it comes to introducing certain order in structure. So historic time follows the era of entropia. So all these structures, they gain complexity and become chaotic in their drive towards complete disruption. But then it is believed that that ideal order is to oppose the entropia of systems. So this is why we cannot learn from history, because it follows that era of entropia. We should be looking for the supreme order which opposes the disruption of structures, and this is this additional rationale and reason for sources of ideas. So speaking about the life and death of form, on the one hand, architecture is tangible, material form of art. So to some extent it is doomed to die. But on the other hand, as modernists, we believe in the world of ideas, of illusion and eternity. So I believe that as Hamlet, we are torn in that conflict that cannot be decided.